newsrooms are in trouble. We know this. Like a lot of newsrooms are closing. That is the environment that the journalists, the young journalists, will have to face. It's an ecosystem where journalism is no longer at the center of the information ecosystem. If they want to be leaders in the newsroom, they need to think business model. They need to think like, how does this newsroom survives? Because while there are a lot of things that independent journalists who are content creators can do, at the same time, newsroom is also a very sustainable model of journalism where you have these newsroom gathering processes. You still need the newsroom. So how do you contribute to improving newsroom survival?
And who can answer this question better than Gemma Mendoza herself? Along with Maria Ressa, she is one of the co-founders of Rappler, the most famous Filipino news website in the world. The impact of Rappler is so tangible that in 2021, its editor and CEO won the Nobel Peace Prize for her efforts to address corruption in the Philippines. Ultimately, of course, this is a team effort, and my guest today, Gemma Mendoza, leads digital innovation and disinformation research at Rappler. In this episode, among other things, we discuss AI-related innovation, the role of Gen Z in the newsroom, the proliferation of deepfakes, and how journalism schools must change to face all these new challenges. Join the conversation. At Rappler, you've been experimenting with generative AI from the get-go. You basically jumped on it in the moment this technology became available. If I remember correctly, at that time, OpenAI was looking for innovative experiments around deliberative technologies, as they put it. And of the 1,000 or so entries OpenAI received, Rappler was one of just 10 companies selected to participate, right?
Yeah. Mm-mm.
So, what is the biggest lesson you've learned so far as a newsroom regarding using AI in the context of journalism and storytelling?
So it's always a hit and miss. And what's very important is to understand the technology, what it can do, what its limitations are, what the risks are. Because there's quite a lot of risks, right? You cannot just like put a chatbot on top of your news or of your website content and then let it be, because it will make mistakes, it will hallucinate, it's a reputational risk. So you need to understand like what it is best used for, like the strengths of AI, like synthesis, for instance, is very good at synthesis. So summarization is low hanging fruit. Asking questions, it's great at asking questions. So it's one of the first things that we worked on as part of like it's actually what we worked on as part of the open AI experiment. Like we used it to facilitate an FGD, a virtual FGD, and within that virtual FGD, the bot, we were feeding the bot well, we prompted the bot to act as a moderator of that FGD. We told it we want to ask questions around this theme, and what it was doing then is it was uh summarizing, like summarizing what was the inputs from the participants, and then it was also using that to generate additional questions, follow-up questions, which is pretty much like a lot safer as a starting point. Generating text is a lot more challenging because there the possible risks, there's quite a lot of risks there.
How do you balance the speed and efficiency that AI offers with Rappler's commitment to slow journalism and deep investigative reporting? Are there any specific types of stories where you found AI particularly helpful or particularly problematic?
Well, first of all, before we went into the realm of conversational chatbots or text generation, that's where we started looking at precisely like, okay, at what point is it okay to just make it public rather than like it going through the process of the news editing. So just to give you an idea, if you're looking at our project, TLDR, for instance, is a project for transforming our content into video. It's again one of those things that AI can do, like from text, generate video using like a set of assets like video clips and then even images. There will be errors there. It will make mistakes in relation to like, okay, is this the actual person that you actually want to be in this video versus like somebody else might be. All of those things, what that means is that before we publish video, somebody has to review it. The conversational chatbot went through a long process because we knew that we needed to ground it in, because for it to converse, for it to respond to questions, and even if it is about our content, you need guardrails in place. So it went through a process of us developing a graph rag. We have engineers who did that. They're sourcing, the graph rag is linked to our to our knowledge graph. The knowledge graph grounds it in our stories, in the stories of Rappler only. So it's not allowed to source from external sources and so on. In effect, it's sort of jumping into the into the thing, but like a lot more slowly than just plugging something in.
So basically, a human journalist always has to be in the loop and always has to have the set of their
That's our AI guidelines. Yeah, our AI guidelines. So we started. The first thing we did actually was like knowing all of these things. Like we were studying. The entire newsroom was really like discussing this. There were big conversations and small conversations. There we had this AI cluster that's been like looking at the technologies as well. So, and then from there, we developed guidelines on how we will use this technology, knowing the risks. And part of the guidelines is there's always somebody, a human in the loop.
Because this technology develops so fast, so I wanted to ask you, what was the biggest surprise for you personally in the way generative AI is developing? So even if you look back at yourself 2 years ago, something you thought back then AI would not be able to do, and it is doing it now.
Like for instance, transcription. For a long time, automated transcription services have not really been useful to us here in the Philippines because there's no particular service that actually translates Filipino, and Filipinos tend to code switch a lot. So we're speaking. It's more of like Taglish. We call it Taglish. Like you're
Tagalog and English, yes.
yes. So Tagalog and English. So it's a mix, and usually transcription tools, they only focus. They're so attuned to a particular language that if you give them something that mixes different languages, they produce gibberish. And that's something that AI seems to be good, like a lot better at. Not yet perfect, but a lot better at. It's picking up. What was surprising to me was it was picking up even local language. It's understanding them, not necessarily able to compose on those local languages because the Philippines has about 100 or so of these languages. Not necessarily able to compose text, but it's able to like pick up the meaning. And we saw this in a number of instances where we tested it on local dialect.
So interesting because Rappler, you produce content in English and Tagalog, right? And other languages as well, or only English and Tagalog?
It's primarily in English, and then if it is important content, we produce like derivatives, like in Tagalog and other Filipino languages. So which can be time consuming. For instance, just to give you an idea, it is past month there's been marathon hearings about the confidential funds of our vice president. And if you expect people to just listen to that, keep listening to that, it's a lot of wasted time. It's like day long hearings, and this is where the power of transcription really would be helpful. And what we are seeing is that there's been quite a lot of improvement in transcription so far with generative AI technology. So that's one use case where they're good at.
In your experience at Rappler, how has AI impacted, if at all, the relationship between journalists and their sources. So, have you noticed any changes in how sources perceive or interact with your journalists when they know AI tools are part of the news gathering process? Less trust, more trust, no impact on trust whatsoever?
Yeah, nothing really, because really the relationship between the journalist and sources, that's still very like personal. And I mean, like, and really, as you said, founded on trust. Like, sources will not talk to a machine, particularly if that machine is connected to some Silicon Valley corporation. Right. So,
Yes. What
eh,
if they know, let's say you work on a sensitive investigative report,
mm,
and the sources you interview for this report, they are aware that the information, the confidential information they give you, you might upload to one of the AI powered tools. And who owns
that's
the data and all that? How does it work in your
so
newsroom?
that's a management thing. So for instance, they're things you don't feed into the machine, right? There are things you still filter. There are things that you will not ever put there. There's public interest data, there's publicly available data that you will want to put there. Documents, for instance, that are actually supposed to be made available to the public. Those are things you can put on those tools. But when you're talking about like an interview with a very sensitive source, maybe you may not want to do that.
I see. I just want to make it clear. So you do make this conscious decision not to put certain information, not to feed certain data into the AI tools. Because I talk to investigative journalists around the world, and they tell me sometimes, the question is who owns the data which we feed into these tools is a huge question. Sometimes they surprise themselves that they put actually quite a lot of sensitive data into those machines because it makes their life easier. It speeds up
Hmm.
the whole process. So your approach is different. You never put any sensitive information from your source, you never feed it into the AI powered tools.
I would not do that. I mean, that's something that really needs to be discussed among journalists, precisely. Like a lot of the tools we now use, like even this tool that you're using has AI, right? And yes, but I think where what I'm pointing out about is, like, for instance, I will not put an interview with a source in something that I will eventually make available online through the chatbot. Because we have our conversational chatbot. Why? There are some parts of conversations which precisely are not for public use, and they're just for background. So the manner by which you use AI still needs to be guided by the ethics of journalism, and part of that is also like how we treat our sources, right? And that's very fundamental. Like, we protect our sources.
At Rappler, you also create your own AI tools in house. Two questions I have here. First, so when do you decide to create your own tool instead of using what's already on the market? And second, how do you go about ethical implications when you use your own data? How do you make sure your data is not biased, for example?
So first of all, the tools that we've done so far, so that we are making available to the public, is, well, one is the summarization. It's pretty straightforward. When it comes to like synthesis already, like, or putting together content, that's precisely where we know we have to build on top of, because that's the audible is something that we just pick up product from the market, right? I mean, we subscribe to something, it's easy to put up. We just rolled out the our conversational chat, but it was made available very limited to very limited beta testers in October. In order for us to do that, we knew that we had to build the infrastructure that will ground the AI, the LLM, so that it's not responding when it's not making things up when it doesn't know things. It's just using our data, our content. It has definitions. We give it like structures. Like it's more than the stories. We built an knowledge graph. That has been defined and structured using ontologies that are based on the domains we're familiar with. So all of those things are guardrails that allow the AI to interpret things in a more accurate way.
On the subject of ethics, very interesting because in 2023, Rappler was the first Filipino newsroom to publish guidelines on AI use, right? You talk there about transparency, safety, and the supremacy of human critical thinking. How would you evaluate the implementation of these guidelines? Was it easy, everyone agreed and followed, or it wasn't that straightforward? How did you implement, basically?
Well, first of all, it as I mentioned earlier, it required an organization-wide conversation. So before the guidelines were crafted, there were workshops on AI. The journalists actually tend to react two ways to AI. Some are like gung ho, and then the others are like, okay, I'm scared. Like, oh, this is like scary. So the challenge is really like, how do you encourage innovation and experimentation within these boundaries, and also within the context of the values Rappler holds dear. So that's a lot of, not just about the publishing of the guidelines. The guidelines came from the conversations, but at the same time about like continuously discussing this, like this technology, like looking at, we understand it's transformative, and we have to understand it both from the newsroom's use case where we want to take advantage of it, but also like understand the risks and be able to report on these risks. So it's a balance. Part of my role is actually researching platforms and looking at how deepfakes have been persisting in social media space. So it's really that, like making sure that you're always abreast with the technology. This is something the entire management is conscious of. It's not something like we say, okay, oh, we want to be into it. Well, we want to be into it, but we want to be able to do this in a cautious way because we know the risks.
And I hope that your AI guidelines is kind of work in progress because things are changed so fast.
Yeah.
So you constantly
Well,
need to revise them, right?
well, it's not precisely the guidelines that you need, because a lot of the stuff there are very universal. Like these are our thoughts, these are the things that we want to make sure. These are our boundaries, basically. Like, okay, the journalist will never be replaced. AI is a machine. Who makes the judgment? Who is accountable? That's at the end of the day, it's about accountability, like who is accountable for any error, for instance. And at the end of the day, that's a human being. It's more of like the strategies for implementation that evolves given like developments in the space.
Gemma, so what would you recommend to any other newsroom in the world which now works on its AI ethical guidelines? How to approach it? What are the most important things not to be overlooked?
Well, it's very important, of course, to understand the technology. A lot of reading. I've been reading a lot. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, audibles, etc., and even took courses in on prompt engineering, just to see like what it can do. So experiment a lot. By experimenting, you see then how to embrace what's new without like being, like caught in the marketing gimmicks. There's quite a lot of hype about AI and what it can do. You need to ground yourself. That's something that we journalists need to be conscious of, like ground our approach in what it actually can do, and what risks are. So those are always the questions that we need to be keep on asking ourselves. What are the risks? What can it do? So it's about that.
Let's talk about values you have at Rappler. So Rappler, one of the most famous Filipino news website in the world, stands on these three pillars. Correct me if I'm wrong. So journalism, technology, and the wisdom of the crowd. Let's talk
Mhm.
about the wisdom of the crowds. What exactly do you mean by this? And how do you as a newsroom rely on this wisdom?
It's really community. The third pillar is community. So we believe that journalism should be grounded in communities they serve, and should be collaborating closely with communities they serve. And over the past years, we have illustrated these through various flagship projects. For instance, we had this project called Project Agos, which is around responding to disasters, climate change, and all those hazards that the Philippines is prone to. So the Philippines is top 4 in terms of hazards. And if you look at given our population, the number one among the most populous countries in the world that are prone to hazards. And media has a role to play in that space, like informing people, and alerting people in with respect to how do you respond to something like an earthquake, or something like something that we're expecting, the worst case scenarios, and so on. And that's where there's collaboration, like we work with different sectors there. And when we talk about wisdom of the crowds, when we talk about it, it's partly around that. It's not just about the crowd, like listening to people, everybody, and the noise, but it's actually like looking at how we can tap into that so that there's more impact, like the work that we're doing as journalists has more impact.
Maybe you can give me an example. How do you use AI around the intersection of journalism, tech, and community engagement? Can you share maybe one of your most successful experiments in that area?
So this is a new use case. The moderator tool that we discussed earlier, our civic engagement team, they work with local government in the biggest local city in the Philippines, the Quezon City. The local government wants to pass an ordinance around pedestrianizing one of the iconic streets there, so making it carless. And obviously, there's quite a lot of stakeholders there. So what we did was we used the AI chat room, the FGD chat room, to get inputs from stakeholders. So there were hundreds that participated here. Get inputs from them on what would make that ordinance successful. And that's not something you can actually like easily ask in a survey, because in a survey you just have like fixed questions, fixed responses, right? Now that's possible with AI. With AI, you can actually ask an open-ended question and have people respond, and then the AI was synthesizing and in fact quantifying, like who are in favor, like how many are in favor of this, what are the thoughts of people in terms of what time should it be, like should it be the entire day, etc., and so on. So all of those inputs help inform the counselor who was sponsoring this ordinance, and that was presented to the local council. So that's a use case where you're looking at tech, AI facilitating deliberations around a particularly complex issue.
What about new distribution channels? How can AI help with that? How can you basically reach beyond your loyal audience, beyond your target audience? Have you started experimenting in that direction?
More along, so this is the TLDR project. So this is the text to video. When you're talking new distribution areas, it's like video is one stream where there's quite a lot of people already, a lot of engagement, but maybe the audiences there are not necessarily interacting with our stories because they're in that space, they're not reading. I mean, and unfortunately for us, many people are not reading anymore. So we need to have a way to, like, transform the content into a format that fits that audience. There's only so much that our production team can do. So for a number of the stories, what we did was like and this is working with the editors and the writers, so they really still need to go through this before it's finally published. So that's one area where AI can help with distribution.
So basically, for you, the distribution is you repackage your existing content from text into video, audio to reach different audiences because they don't read, so you need to repackage it in a format they use, right? I'm wondering, Gemma, are there any Gen Z journalists in your newsroom? So people under 25?
Oh, a lot of them.
A lot of them. It's amazing because it's still quite rare when, kind of established, even digital platform like you have lots of Gen Z people. It's amazing. So kudos to you. Would you say they have a very different approach to and relations with generative AI technologies? And what can others learn from them in your newsroom, for example?
So that's precisely why we have these projects, right? Like for instance, the video project and so on, because that's really what that's where they are. The Gen Zs are on TikTok or on they're viewing rather than reading really. So that's part of the input. So the Gen Zs actually in our newsroom, we have a Gen Z cluster. We always have this conversation with them about like, okay, how do we reach your generation? How do we talk to your generation in a consistent and effective way and in a sustained way? Yeah, so that's an ongoing thing.
It's funny that you said we have a Gen Z cluster. So are they a cluster, or they also have like senior roles, or not yet?
So part of what the newsroom does is really like spot who has leadership potential, and yeah, some of the leaders are from that generation.
I don't know whether you collaborate with any journalism schools in the Philippines, but I wanted to ask you. So, let's say if you would teach at a journalism school, or the way you see kind of how what kind of younger journalists you would like to have in your newsroom, what would you change in the educational system at journalism schools to make future human journalists more adapted to the new reality?
I think what is very important right now. So you have the basic values of journalism, right? But the thing that journalism schools really need to be teaching journalists now is, so for instance, fundamentally, newsrooms are in trouble. We know this. Like a lot of newsrooms are closing. That is the environment that the journalists, the young journalists, will have to face. It's an ecosystem where journalism is no longer at the center of the information ecosystem, and you have a lot of competitors, you have a lot of content creators out there. You are a content creator,
Yeah,
and
of course. No, and Netflix is content creators, one of the biggest, right? And it's also a competitor. It's not like, at the BBC, we used to say years ago, who are our competitors? Okay, CNN, New York Times, but not anymore. Any YouTuber is your competitor as well.
so the competition is a lot bigger. They have to understand that. And there are still roles that newsrooms play. They need to think business model. If they want to be leaders in the newsroom, they need to think business model. They need to think like, how does this newsroom survives? Because while there are a lot of things that content create, like independent journalists who are content creators can do, at the same time, there are like the newsroom is also a very sustainable model of journalism where you have these processes, the newsroom gathering processes. You still need the newsroom. So how do you contribute to improving newsroom survival is one thing that I think a lot of journalism schools are not putting a lot of thought on, and that's really one of those things that we want to work with them. We've actually started taking steps towards that. So we restructured training. We now have a training cluster at Rappler, and that's led by our investigative editor. And what we have been doing is like crash courses that would ideally serve as bridges between the practitioners, the industry, and academe. And those are things that we're working on.
I also wanted to ask you, how do you upskill your journalists? So you train them in-house, but I guess that not every single journalist in a newsroom can adapt. Do you hire new people for new roles, AI related?
We have data scientists, we have data analysts, but what we found is that not everybody is plug and play. It's really like there needs to be a fusion. So there's still internal training, either for the non-journalists, they need to learn the method and the discipline of journalism, and then on the other hand, the journalists also need to learn the other side. It's cross pollination.
I love this word, cross pollination. So data scientists work together with reporters, with designers. All is this mixed.
And the engineers as well. So as we're crafting these conversational AIs, we're working on that. They learn how journalists think. They learn the methodology. They learn the things that shouldn't be happening, and so on. In effect, the newsroom needs to fuse.
Again, talking about this intersection, because you, from the very beginning, I think Rappler was very clear about that you are where technology is as well. So you're constantly experimenting with that. What do you learn from other areas, other industries, from tech industry maybe, or I don't know, maybe even from healthcare industry? Do you sometimes look for lessons in a different industry? So what can we as journalists can learn from different industries, AI related? How do we apply these tools, or even business, reimagining business model?
Yeah, there's a lot to learn. And specifically from tech, we also learn from the people who organize, the civil society group. So it's a back and forth. I mean, we're not the experts in organizing, although we want to we want to work with the civil society groups. We're not the experts on certain things that government does.
Gemma, you also lead Rappler's efforts to address disinformation in digital media. Can you share with us some recent examples of how Gen AI tools helped your newsroom to make that work more efficient?
For detecting this information, we use a number of tools for just checking on whether something has something is not camera native, for instance. Like we've come across quite a lot of videos, for as I mentioned before, where which we think were manipulated. So we use AI detection tools for double checking that, but at the same time, we also backed it up with further research.
In terms of debunking myth and disinformation, so Gen AI tools not only help journalists to debunk disinformation, they also used by those who create
Yeah.
disinformation and all that, and deep fakes. And even I know that in the Philippines, you had lots of different deep fakes and super trustworthy, very good quality deep fakes regarding, the presidential campaigns, or even Maria Ressa, right? So your own editor.
Yeah.
And it was, I think you were surprised yourself how, in a way, genuine that deep fake was. So, any examples you can share how the Gen AI tools are used in the Philippines to produce deep fakes? Are there any patterns, any peculiarities?
A lot of them are really like, okay, so for instance, some of the groups that were really, you know, abused, I guess. We're journalists. So the broadcast journalists, a lot of these Jenny, a lot of the deep fakes were about journalists supposedly reporting on something, broadcast journalists reporting on something, and supposedly endorsing products. So there's quite a lot of them, and pretty much what we do is we use the tool, but we also observe the video, and then we research on, like, we do research on the what were used to put, like, what was the specific video that was edited, and so on. So it's a combination of tools, really, not just one tool, but a combination of tools.
Are there any regional peculiarities in terms of how people use deepfakes technology, or is there more universal appeal and approach? What are your observations on this? So would you
Lot
say
of these
in the Philippines they like to do this and that?
Well, a lot of these are really just replacing audio. You mentioned Maria Ressa, the deepfakes on Maria. What was disconcerting about it was, like, if you listen to it, it sounded like her. I mean, like, the audio was really, it really sounded like she was speaking. I mean, and I know Maria personally. So that's really what's very disconcerting about that. The video, so there was this deep fake video of the President Marcos. It didn't have his face, but it's just pretty much a recording, and then there's a slapped on top of a video. And again, the audio was really, like, really sounded like the president was calling for war already. There's a conflict over certain territories, and China's been trying to own the entire South China Sea, which is doesn't, like, there are other competing claims there, and the Philippines actually won a case. And there's been tension over the past months, and during that period there were deep fakes that were being circulated. The most disconcerting was the one on the president saying that he has authorized the military to actually go to to act on the issue and in effect go to war. So that's one of those things that we are seeing. But a lot of these are also like scams, like
Mhm.
quite a lot of scams, and we're finding quite a lot of them on the ads library of Facebook, of Meta, and they were promoting video generated, I mean, we think that really pretty much just use spoofing technology, voice spoofing technology. And there was this one Maria Ressa video that supposedly was endorsing a diabetes cure. And when I looked at that page, the page that boosted, like promoted that video, it was also using it. It was also advertising several other deepfakes that were on a number of very notable personalities, celebrities, politicians, and so on. So there's this one doctor who's very much, like popular on social media. He's been, deepfaked a lot. Like there's quite a lot of deepfakes where he's supposedly endorsing quite a lot of products. Never did. Like,
Mm.
so we already have one liner that where we we got from him that, okay, except for this thing, he never
Yeah,
endorsed.
don't endorse that and that. Okay. Well, it's funny, but it's also a bit scary, right? That it's especially when you have a deep fake when the president announces a war or something and it's not true. So, what about the people in the Philippines? How AI literate are they? I understand
So
it's a huge country. You can't talk about everyone, of course. Somebody is more literate, somebody is less. But what do you notice? I don't know. Even among your audience, would you say they are super illiterate? Or it's in a way, I wanted to ask you about kind of these disparities between global north and global south. So people have different access, people have different skill, different knowledge. Do you notice this in the Philippines? That it's almost like AI creating an inequality because people have less knowledge, less access, or it's not true if we talk about the Philippines?
Well, so Filipinos tend to adopt new technology so fast. And one of the things, if you look at the usage of, I think, ChatGPT, or maybe that was Perplexity AI, the Philippines is among the top 10 already. And that's been the case before, even with blogging and social media. So like as soon as the technology becomes nascent, Filipinos adopt it. We are pretty loquacious people, so we tend to like chatter a lot. So we went into social media so fast. There's that. We done actually a survey of our audience where we were looking at, like, okay, are they familiar with these technologies? And yeah, it's nationwide. It's not just in it's not just in Metro Manila. It's not as prevalent as social media, but it's almost, there was this one time when I was in this school because we were doing this workshop, and I was listening to a group of students discussing stuff, and they were talking about AI, like the AI in video, where because they when they're attending classes, they're using AI um to fool their professors
I see, of
into thinking
course.
that they
They are the first ones to do it, I think. But I think what the professors or the teacher is supposed to have
yeah.
also tools to detect that, right?
But it's more of a generational divide then. So like there are professors, there are teachers that are not as adept as their students. So that becomes a concern. So the nature of the disconnect, I think, is more of like, okay, you have generations that are really adept in it, like the Gen Zs are, and you have people, you have the older folk trying to, like, like some of them would allow their students, and the others are like really restrictive. So that's where we are right now.
So you would say if there is a disparities and it's not geographical, it's more generational.
Yeah, generational.
Gemma, what is your personal life hack for journalists and storytellers regarding using AI? An advice maybe you could give to yourself.
Hmm. Personal hack. One thing that's very interesting about AI is, like, again, synthesis. So like one of the things I'm playing it right now is Notebook LLM, and I pretty much dump stuff there, and then it's picking up from there. But of course, when I looked at the podcast, it's not really something I would publish. It helps with just drawing insights, like starting point, but it's just very important that you double check things. So it's surfacing stuff, initial stuff. It's like a brainstorming tool. I think of it like a brainstorming tool.
I want to ask you blitz questions, so very short questions, very short answers. Don't think, just fire.
Okay.
What are your three dominant emotions about the rapid development of AI? Emotions, not thoughts.
Wonders, fear, and fascination.
What is your most exciting AI related project you work on now, if you put it in one sentence?
The work we're doing on Rai is really fascinating to me, and there's quite a lot more to do.
But can you describe it, the RAI? What's the purpose? What kind of problem does it solve, this bot you're working on?
Well, surfacing content for our audience, but also surfacing new ones and potential leads for our journalists. So those are things that we want to work on with Rai.
The future of journalism, how would you describe it in 3 words?
Oh my God, that's kind of challenging. Again, scary, but also exciting. And guess the last would be experimentation.
Yeah.
It's will require a lot of experimentation.
Do you see already it in your daily work that the nature of journalism is changing?
It's been changing for years, like transform journalism, and it is still transforming journalism.
So basically, when you came into this profession years ago, and let's say when a 15-year-old will come into this profession some years later, it's almost like two different professions.
Yeah, precisely. Like you started with like writers are writers, broadcast journalists are broadcast journalists. Technology transformed that and made everybody, like required everybody to learn all those things, and now we are being asked to curate content,
Or
even
co-create content with our communities, with our audiences.
and engineer knowledge, right? So very, very different.
So, Gemma, what would you say to a 15-year-old who still decides who she or he wants to become professionally, and you need to make a case for journalism? What would you say to this girl or boy? Why should they become journalists?
Well, because the mission of journalism, even with all of these changes and transformation, remains the same. It is to surface and to alert the public about what's important and what's matters of public interest, what they are, what things that they should know, so that they can act accordingly, make decisions accordingly, and shape the directions of nations.
What have you learned about AI and storytelling recently through your work, your research, your communication with your newsroom that made you think, wow? I know a lot of things made us think, wow, but maybe made you think and rethink certain things you had in mind.
I talked about scary, right? Journalists really need to think more and be better at their craft now because of the way AI is transforming the information ecosystem. So deriving insight, there are things that AI can already do. And so what does that means is that we just need to be able to, like, we need to upskill ourselves. Essentially, we need to be better at drawing insight from complexity, and making sure that we're grounding whatever it is that we're seeing from documents. It's a lot of things, and it's really, really way beyond just he said, she said. Now it's really like we need to be very analytic and so on. So it's in a way it's gonna force us to be good journalists.
Let me ask you, so when you came to Rappler years ago and when you started to be a lead researcher for disinformation, and I put it like head of digital strategy, your job was probably a bit different than what it is now. Your job is also has transformed. How do you see I hate predictions, to be honest. How do you see your job? No, I don't want to ask you how do you see your job in 5 years, because we don't know in a way. But how did your job transform from the moment when you just started working for Rappler, especially in the last 2 years? What was the role of AI in transforming your job?
A part of the things that I've been doing over the years is really like looking at the systems and how, like, the technology systems and how that applies, like how we can leverage those systems to do our work and achieve scale. That's really like, if you want to look at like what I've been doing in a nutshell. But as a journalist, I'm focused on the research. I'm not the day-to-day operator for the newsroom. So research, data gathering. So I work with the research group and the data teams. It started from analyzing those complex data sets, and drawing stories from them. But now, it's transforming more and more into knowledge engineering, like understanding how to structure the data we're gathering so that the machines understand it better and that they're able to interpret it better, and then in the process help the machines help journalists.
What do you love the most about your job?
I love the experimentation. I love being able to work on new things and evolve, help the newsroom evolve, because we're looking at these new things. So like the eyes on the tech industry is very critical, because as you're looking at it, you're seeing things that the journalists can use, but also grounding that effort in our ethics and our mission and our editorial guidelines.
Yeah, you're basically shaping the future of Rappler because you think ahead, right?
We call it, the project is really called the future of news. It's thinking about imagining what journalism should be. It's a very audacious goal.
Yes. And then when I ask you, so what the future of journalism, then you work on it. So you're supposed to, well, you're not supposed to do it.
Imagining it. We're imagining their dreams and working on those dreams.
I don't want to ask you what do you hate about your job, but I would ask you the last question. What do you find the most challenging about your job? Something maybe you would like to like, oh, this is not, I don't want, this is, well, I love my job, but because of this, maybe some days I don't really love my job. What is it?
When you're shaping a dream, you need to take the organization with you. And I wouldn't say I hate it, but it's more of like the challenging part of it is how do you take, how does the newsroom follow? Like how or not necessarily follow, but how do you involve people? How do you get them to understand what this thing called ontology or knowledge graph is? Or do they really need to know that? How do they work with something like AI? How do they work even with a CMS? Right? I mean, we started there. We started from understanding that journalists need to be actually on the CMS, not having another technologies putting things there to this. Having journalists understand data and then now AI. Along that line is a lot of training, but also evangelizing and a lot of conversations. That's the challenging part.
A lot of newsrooms now go through this change, they first went to digital change, now AI. It's so difficult to get people on board, get everyone in a newsroom on board. So yes, I want this change. People are tired. People are, people don't want another extra something for the same money or something. What is your advice or what is your tip? How to get people on board? Different people with different mindsets. Do you show them this tool will make their life easier? Or what is your tip? How do you do this? Basically, it's a change. How do you change mindsets in your newsroom?
Well, a big part of it is listening also to their concerns, because like sometimes the trouble is that there are things that they're worried about, yeah, right? So like looking at that and looking at the operations and like where are they having difficulties in, and then looking at like how do you smoothen that, how do you streamline, or how do you make it easier for them? How do you simplify? That's really the I mean, at the end of the day, it's very important, because then when you listen, not everybody will be on board all the time.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank you so much for your time and your thoughts and invaluable insights you shared with me.
Thank you so much, and it's been great chatting with you, Ilona.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of AI Fluent with me, Ilona Vinogradova, and feel a bit less alone in your everyday newsroom struggles. This podcast was produced by Love and Films Pro Media Lab. If you would like to hear more, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. I hope you'll join me next time. Until then, take good care of yourself, and remember, your stories do matter.